Hi, I'm Rocky Hulse, and welcome back to another episode of Truth Outreach, a program that's grounded in truth, which brings you a comparison in the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons, and Christianity. And of course, in that comparison with Christianity, the baseline we always use is the B-I-B-L-E, the Bible, basic instruction before leaving Earth. I'm Rocky Hulse, and this lovely lady on my right is my beautiful wife, Helen.
Welcome.
And we are the founders of Mormon Missions Midwest Outreach. And we always like to start our program out with a couple of quotes that we use, one from Brigham Young and one from his first counselor, George A. Smith, which we think validates this program, so we're going to start out with them right now. Brigham Young said, "I say to the whole world, receive the truth, no matter who presents it to you. Take up the Bible, compare the religion of the Latter-day Saints with it, and see if it will stand the test." Now, his first counselor, George A. Smith, had this to say, "If a faith will not bear to be investigated, if its preachers and professors are afraid to have it examined, their foundation must be very weak." So we believe that those two quotes from Mormon leaders give us permission on this show to do what we do, and that is compare their teachings to Christianity, and there we clearly see that Mormonism is a false religion. Now, today is the final program, fifth of a series of programs, fifth episode that we've been shooting on September the 11th in the Mormons and the Mountain Meadows Massacre and how that ties into Mormon theology. Now, as we've said before, we're going to call this program rated PG because we're going to be talking about some pretty gruesome things. So if you have some young, PG-13, if you have some young kids in the room, you might want to take them out because we're going to be talking about some kind of gruesome things that they may not be good for little ears to hear. Let's just get right into it. Let's take a look at it. The program of today's, the title of today's program is September the 11th in the Mormons, Part 5. This is a series that we have done about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which ties into September the 11th. In this month of September, as we reflect on what happened on September 11th, 2001, there was another atrocious September the 11th in American history, and that was September the 11th, 1857. And we're going to put up on the screen, just as a refresher, or some folks that maybe haven't been with us yet. On September the 11th, 1857, 120 unarmed, non-Mormon men, women, and children were brutally murdered in cold blood by Mormons and Indians. Now, this particular atrocity that happened was the most brutal murder in American history of Americans by Americans until the Oklahoma City bombing came along. But as far as the atrocity of it, it has no match, because Timothy McVeigh went in and bombed a building, but the Mormons here calculated what they were going to do. They went in under a truce flag, lured these people out of the wagon train, out in the open, and then massacred them. It was brutal, it was gory, it was atrocious. And what we've been trying to do in this program is to show how it happened, tied into why it happened, tied into Mormon theology. 4 weeks ago on program 1, we described in awful detail exactly what happened. And then in 3 weeks ago on part 2, we talked about the doctrines and the teachings of the church and some events that led up to it and how it happened. Then in 2 weeks ago, in part 3, we went in and talked about the senior Mormon officials, stake presidents, first counselor stake president, bishops, high councilmen. These were high Mormon leaders that were involved in this massacre.
All Temple Mormons.
All Temple Mormons. And then last week, you're exactly right. Now, Temple Mormons is so key.
That's so key.
It's so important.
Can't leave that out.
Yep.
Temple Mormons.
Temple Mormons that did this. And then last week, we talked about the cover-up and how the Mormon Church went in and covered this thing up. And I wanted to do, what we're going to lead into now real quick is kind of the end of last week. I was going to try and get this in, just ran out of time. So we're going to kind of pick up and finish out a few items, and then we'll do a recap. So what I want to show is that we're going to put up on the screen for you right now is that when this massacre happened, directly after it, the Mormons all gathered around and prayed about this gory massacre, and then they took oaths of secrecy to swear that they would never talk about it. All those who had taken part then gathered in a prayer circle. Their leaders first gave thanks to God for delivering our enemies into our hands, Lee said. Then they vowed to keep their involvement in the massacre a secret and always to say the Indians did it alone. Every man swore a solemn oath to help kill all who proved to be traitors.
So that was a blood oath that they swore.
Yes. And Helen makes a great point here.
That was a blood oath.
It was a blood oath.
Blood oath that they swore.
And see, the Mormons were programmed into blood oaths.
Absolutely.
Okay? They really were.
They still are.
and they still are. Okay? Now, then we're going to put another PowerPoint up on the screen here for you. And this literally shows you that Brigham Young was caught red-handed in this thing. Now, this is a quote out of a diary from his brother-in-law. He says, I gave them, he's talking about the Indians. He's meeting with Indian chiefs here, and this is right out of this diary. I is Brigham. I gave them all cattle that had gone to Cal, the south route. It made them open their eyes, they said, that you have, or they said, but you have, this is Indians now talking, you have told us not to steal. Now, Brigham again. So I have, but now they have come to fight us and you, for when they kill us, they will kill you. They said they was afraid to fight the Americans. The Indians now talking again. They were afraid to fight the Americans, and so would raise allies, and we might fight. The we might fight is the Mormons. Now this is kind of crude, and you have to kind of break this down a little bit, but this is right out of this diary. Now, Brigham goes on here, and Brigham lies about what happened. In the Journal of Discourses, in a sermon that he preached, he says, a company of immigrants were traveling on the route to California. Nearly all of that company were destroyed by Indians. That unfortunate affair has been laid to the charge of the whites. Now, Brigham is absolutely lying here. Because this quote we just had up there was 6 years after it had been fully reported to him what had gone on. And we saw in the previous quote that he told the Indian chiefs, you can have all the cattle in the trains going, in the wagon trains going south, which was the one they went and massacred 7 days later. Mm-hmm. Brigham Young ordered it. He had all these reports, which we showed in last week's show, that said that he knew directly what was going on. And then 6 years later, he gets up and lies about it. And as we showed just a second ago, how they got together, prayed about it, and then swore oaths that they would not say anything. Well, the next one that we're going to put up on the screen here for you clearly shows that Mormons were preconditioned to, in fact, swear oaths. This is right here. In fact, this oath that's on the screen right now is today. Today in the Mormon temple ceremonies.
You swear this oath.
3 different times, the Mormons going through the temple today must swear this very oath on the screen right now. I, and then you say your name, covenant that I will never reveal the first token of the Aaronic priesthood with its accompanying name, sign, and penalty. Rather than do so, I would suffer my life to be taken. And then they're supposed to execute the penalty. Now they no longer have to execute the penalty, but they have to say that oath was just up there on the screen.
And
of course they have to raise their right hand up to the square. It all comes out of masonry. That's exactly where all this stuff comes from. But see, they swore oaths of secrecy that they would never tell what happened, and they would lay all the blame to the Indians. Now, these oaths of secrecy, now this next quote that I'm going to lead into and start reading right now, this is out of Mormon history. The 10th prophet of the Mormon Church, Joseph Fielding Smith, wrote this in the book called Essentials in Church History, and he says this, Oaths of Secrecy. This is on page 422. A bloody oath. The white men, of course they always say the white men, it wasn't Mormons. Yes, it was, but they try and keep that distance. Oh, it was white men. No, the Mormons, but I continue the quote. The white men who were engaged in this horrible slaughter entered into a league by a strong and binding oath that they would never reveal the part they played in this gruesome tragedy. A false report was forwarded to Governor Young. And then he goes on and says, Lee also reported in person, laying the blame solely to the Indians. And Governor Young wept bitterly and was horrified at the recital of the tale. Now this is right out of Essentials in Church History. And he says that when Brigham Young received this report, that he wept bitterly and was horrified at the recital of the tale. Okay? Now, whenever you read Mormon history that's produced by the Mormon Church, and some people may get offended by what I'm going to say, but it's the truth. Folks, you have to play Paul Harvey. You have to get the rest of the story, because Mormon history has been absolutely sanitized. It's been rewritten to reflect what they want it to reflect instead of the truth. And that is just the hard, cold facts of it.
Sure.
And this last quote here by this 10th Mormon prophet who says that Brigham Young wept bitterly and was horrified at the recital of the tale. Well, let's take a look at what really happened. Okay? Now, in the Forgotten Kingdom, this book called Forgotten Kingdom here, on page 177, and we've seen in previous programs, there was an Army major by the name of, he was a brevet major by the name of Carleton, assigned by the federal government to go investigate what happened. And this is him. Carleton and the men of Company K of the 1st Dragoons collected there at the site almost 2 years after it happened, and the bones are scattered everywhere. Okay? So Carleton and the men of Company K collected the bones of 34 immigrants and buried them in a common grave on the north side of the Arkansans' rude fortification. Over the remains, they erected a conical monument. So they put this big rock conical-shaped monument 12 feet high, made of granite stones and surmounted by a 12-foot cross. They put this cedar cross up there, facing toward the Great Salt Lake City, cut from cedar. On the cross was deeply carved the words, quote, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." The biblical warning struck no apparent fear in Brigham Young, in Brigham Young's heart when he read the inscription 2 years later during his first visit to southern Utah, to southern Utah settlements after the massacre. Apostle Woodruff, now this Apostle Woodruff eventually became the 4th Mormon prophet, accompanied him to the site and reported that the Mormon leader read Carleton's epitaph, thought for a while, and then said, now this is Woodruff quoting, this is the 4th Mormon prophet in his diary quoting what happened. He says that Brigham Young said, "It should be vengeance is mine, and I have taken a little." One of Young's escorts then lassoed the cross with a rope, turned his horse, and pulled it down. Brigham Young, quote, "didn't say another word," recalled Dudley Levitt. He didn't give an order, he just lifted his right arm to the square, and in 5 minutes there wasn't one stone left upon another. He didn't have to tell us what needed to be done. We understood. So the Mormon, 10th prophet of the Mormon Church says that Brigham Young wept bitterly over this whole thing, but in the diary, which tells the truth about what happened, 2 years later when he shows up at the scene, they pull the cross, they lasso the cross, pull it down off of this rock cairn monument, and then tear the monument to shreds. Brigham Young says, you know, that epitaph should read, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, and I have taken a little."
Yeah, and well, kind of fits in with the fact that they don't have crosses today in any of their buildings, do they?
No. The Mormons don't like crosses.
They don't want crosses. They don't like them.
Brigham Young tore this one down. If this was such an atrocious event in his eyes or in the Mormon Church's eyes, and that the Indians had really committed such an atrocious crime, why did they tear this thing down?
Right.
Why did they tear down
vengeance is mine,
the monument, pull the cross down, and make such a statement? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, let's continue on in this here. Now, in the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which was a book by Josiah F. Gibbs, he writes, "An illustration of the desperate and lying defense of the Mormon prophets, and in defiance of the fact that Jacob Hamblin, which we heard last week was the Indian agent who reported to Brigham Young exactly what happened. So in defiance of the fact that Jacob Hamblin told him the whole truth of the massacre, Brigham Young on January the 6th, 1858, wrote James W. Denver, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs." So Brigham Young writes an official letter to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs in Washington, D.C., and this is in January, right after the incident in September, about 5 months later, and this is what he says, quote, "Sir, on or about the middle of last September, a company of immigrants traveling the southern route to California poisoned the meat of an ox that died and gave it to the Indians to eat. causing the immediate death of 4 of their tribe and poisoning several others. This company also poisoned the water where they were encamped. This occurred at Corn Creek, 15 miles from Fillmore City. This conduct so enraged the Indians that they took measures for revenge. Well, Brigham Young knew that was a bald-faced lie when he wrote it, and what else can you say? It's absolutely proven in history that he knew this was a lie, but that's to try and maintain the fact that the Indians did it and that the Mormons had nothing to do with it. So he writes an official letter to the Indian agent in Washington and bald-faced lies to him. This continues, a quote from Josiah F. Gibbs, and he says, "The above letter from Brigham Young to James W. Denver has been herein proved to be totally and completely false," which we just said. Now let's go on and show that in this same month when he wrote this letter, he flat out knew that was a lie, that the Mormons had done it. Well, and he knew John D. Lee did it for sure. He rewards John D. Lee. Let's look how he rewards.
He him.
In his private sealing room, Brigham Young married Emma Batchelor to John D. Lee on January the 7th of 1858. To celebrate, Lee provided a treat of cherry brandy, sugar, and liquors, while Mrs. Ezra Taft Benson made the bride a cake and a good dinner. Lee's guests, including Isaac Haight, the Mormon stake president who ordered this thing, ate, drank, and made merry, and had a first-rate good time. The prophet married Isaac Haight to Elizabeth Summers on January 24th, the day before Lee, Haight, and their new wives left Salt Lake. Lee gave Haight a brace of Colt revolvers, perhaps as a wedding gift. Lee had taken the initiative in contracting this marriage to Emma, but the timing of the 2 weddings led to charges that the new brides were the men's reward for their work at Mountain Meadows.
Sure.
Well, yeah.
Which wife was that for Lee?
Oh, this
out
was
of the
like,
19.
Well, this was like wife number 15 or something.
Exactly.
But the whole thing is Brigham Young knew
that was his present.
Yeah, and then he rewards these 2 men because Isaac Haight was the stake president, who was the theocratic leader down there, and he directly ordered it to be done. John D. Lee just carried out those orders, but eventually this all got blamed on Lee. But here the prophet is giving them new wives, giving them rewards, knew that they were involved in this, directly involved in it, and he rewarded them with new wives. Now, John D. Lee was eventually excommunicated. I mean, when the word got out and hit the nation, there was an uproar across the nation. So the church excommunicated him, and then we're going to see what happened here. So the next thing I'm going to put up on the screen is that John D. Lee was excommunicated from the church with the injunction from President Young that under no circumstances should he ever be admitted as a member again. Now this is in Essentials in Church History, written by the 10th Mormon apostle, or 10th Mormon prophet, of the church. He wrote this book, Essentials in Church History, and he says that Brigham Young excommunicated Lee and said that he could never be admitted as a member again. Well, let's see what happened just a couple years after that book came out. Temple worker Merritt L. Norton had presented the family's request. John D. Lee's family requested to, and I'm going to throw that up on the screen right now, had requested to the church that they be reinstated. So he presented the family's request, and on April the 20th, 1961, the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 authorized the restoration of Lee's membership and temple blessings. Norton was baptized for his dead grandfather, and on May the 9th, Apostle Ezra Taft Benson, who later became the 13th prophet of the Mormon Church, officiated in the endowment and the sealing ceremonies at the Salt Lake Temple. So John D. Lee can now become a god again. His blessings are restored.
Exactly.
Folks, I want to get all that into our last show and just couldn't get it all in. There's just so much information. So I'm going to try, and with Helen working with me here, try to recoup back in here and recap. We only got about 7.5 minutes, so really, really quickly put all this back together. In 1857, in April of 1857, a wagon train leaves Arkansas and heads west. They're going to California. And just before...
Where I was born.
Yeah, they're headed to Tulare, mid-central California, where Helen's from. And before they leave Arkansas, or I should say before they left in April, and just before they got into Salt Lake, which was in August, Parley P. Pratt, who was a Mormon apostle, was killed in Arkansas. And he was killed because he married a man's wife. He went and married this guy's wife, and which was against the law of Arkansas and of the land, because Arkansas was a state. So he's breaking the law, but he marries this guy's wife to add her to his polygamous harem, and this guy kills him for doing it. Well,
in Arkansas.
In Arkansas. So then this report gets to Salt Lake just before the wagon train gets there. Well, the wagon train's from Arkansas. So these people are looked at like they're as guilty because of committing this murder because they're from Arkansas and this Mormon apostle was killed there.
They had nothing to do with it.
But you're right, they had absolutely nothing to do with it. And then the Mormon Church was teaching this teaching on blood atonement, which we're going to get into real soon in some upcoming programs. And they were teaching this thing on blood atonement. The Mormon apostle, George A. Smith, who we quote at the start of every program, he is sent by Brigham down to southern Utah to get the people ready for war because the Mormons were not living federal law. They would not adhere to federal law. And so the President of the United States, Buchanan, sent a troop of army into Utah to get it under U.S. law. And they looked at this as they were being attacked by the enemies, the United States. And so this apostle goes to southern Utah to whip them up into, get them ready for war. They're teaching blood atonement, which is that there's certain sins you can commit that will not cover your, that Jesus' blood will not cover your sin, and so you have to shed your own blood. Well, as this wagon train is heading south, the Mormons are saying that these people are saying that some of them were around or involved in some way with the killing of Joseph Smith, and so... Not
Joseph Smith, Parley Pratt.
Well, no, Joseph Smith.
Oh.
Up in Carthage, right here down the road. And they were making rumors that these people were somehow involved in that. So automatically, they were murderers of Joseph Smith. The only way that these people could be saved was to be blood atoned, have their blood shed to atone for that. Well, we saw, as we did here a few minutes ago, that Brigham Young met with the Indian chiefs and gave them all of the cattle going south because they wanted the Indians to work with them. They called the Indians the battle axe of the Lord. And so Brigham gives the Indians these cattle. 7 days later, they attack the wagon train. And then there's a council held down in southern Utah with a stake president. There was 4 bishops. There was high councilmen. They were all involved in this council. They counsel on what to do because the Indians were supposed to wipe out the wagon train and they botched it and they didn't get it done. And so then the Mormons concocted this plan that John D. Lee and a couple of others should ride up with a white flag and tell the immigrants that they've talked with the Indians and the Indians will allow these immigrants under attack safe passage if the Mormons escort them. Right. And so they agree. They have to lay down their weapons. So they do. They lay down their weapons. They're totally unarmed. They lead them out single file out onto this mountain meadows. And then on signal of the second counselor,
do your duty, or
yeah, exactly what he said. He said, "Do your duty." That was the word. Do your duty. They all turned, killed all the men, and then butchered the women and children, with the exception of those 7 years of age and under. Okay, so the bodies are all left out there on the plain, and it's just gross. The coyotes and the wolves eat them. It's terrible.
It's the saddest thing that you can read about.
It's really sad. And then the Army major gets there almost 2 years later. Brevet Major Carlton from California is ordered in by the U.S. to investigate what happened.
He's appalled by what he finds.
He is appalled. He is just amazed. And who wouldn't be?
Right.
And so they gather the bones together and they try and bury them. It was just incredible. All of the spoils, the wagons, the rifles, the cattle, all this stuff is taken to the tithing office there in Parowan, right next to where it happened, and is sold out of the tithing office.
Furniture.
For gain of the Mormon church. Atrocious. Brigham Young was reported, several different people in court testimony reported that they told this to Brigham Young. Brigham Young said, I didn't know anything about it. Oh, no. And the Mormons had nothing to do with it. That's pure balderdash. It was proven to be baloney beyond any reason. Brigham Young knew it. He lied about it in official reports. And then he rewarded John D. Lee and Isaac Haight, who was the stake president who ordered it to happen, and John D. Lee, who was the scapegoat. They had to blame it on somebody. The furor across the United States about this was just overwhelming. So they took John D. Lee to court, and the first court that was done had 8 Mormons on it and 4 Gentiles. If you're not a Mormon, you're a Gentile. Well, all the Mormons in lockstep voted acquittal. So John D. Lee was acquitted. Boy, when that got reported, the United States was in an uproar. And so they tried him again, and this time it was 12 Mormons. Mm-hmm. But see, Brigham Young gave the head nod and said, we've got to have him convicted. So all the Mormons then, all 12 of them, same testimony, boink.
Yep.
He's guilty because pure power. Brigham Young had pure power, and so he ordered it done. So John D. Lee was then convicted, and then he was taken to Mountain Meadows. He was set on his coffin down the spot. They shot him so he could spill his own blood,
because
and therefore,
Jesus' blood wouldn't cover
because
the
that's
sin.
right, it was murder. Jesus' blood doesn't cover the murder, so he spilt his own blood so that he could atone for his sins. And then, when Brigham Young first gets to the monument, it's lassoed. The monument that was built had a cross on it. It was, this big, huge, 12-foot high monument of stones. The cross is pulled down. The stones are all scattered. It was just unbelievable.
And it laid that way for years.
It's right. And they've just recently built new monuments, and that's a whole nother story. We don't have time for that. But Lee is excommunicated, and Brigham Young says he'll never be restored ever to membership in the church. And then in 1961, they restore him. They do all the temple work, so Lee can now become a god again.
They just baptized him in the temple as they do for the dead, on behalf of the dead.
So we got about 10 seconds left. This was a huge teaching.
Yes.
5-part series to put it all together to show you the theologies of the Mormon Church is what caused the Mountain Meadows Massacre.